Honor mode was introduced recently to Baldurs Gate 3, and it is hard. I'm not ashamed to admit that I've failed a few runs, but today I wanted to go through several tips and tricks and things you should know specifically about honor mode so you can avoid failing like me. Let's go! Let me know in the comments who you're taking on your honor mode run. So firstly, we'll talk about this encompassing topic of preparation. And this means a few things. So I think the first one is the whole campcaster concept, which I've talked about in other videos, so I don't want to go too deep on it here. But essentially what I mean by that is having someone to help you prepare for combat encounters that are coming. A good example of this is having a transmutation wizard, either by hireling or even just speccing Gale into that, so that can brew two alchemical solutions instead of one, so you can create potions like potions of speed and strength, etc., that'll actually be really beneficial for your runs. Even though they are a little bit more balanced in the honor mode, they are absolutely still worth using potions for that reason. And just having a hireling at your camp that you can just use to create two potions instead of one, there's no real reason not to. The same goes for having, say, a hireling that is a life domain cleric that you can use to, say, cast aid on your party, which will just give you a increase to your max hit points until the next long rest, or something like long strider to increase your movement speed. These sort of buffs can make significant improvements to your run. Any little bit helps, right? Whether it be just popping that potion that helps you with attack rolls or giving you that extra action, etc., or even as simple as that little bit of extra movement speed so your melee characters can reach them, or just having that little bit of extra health so that you can survive a really deadly attack, which has definitely happened to me. The other thing to think about as well is that long resting does cost 80 supplies in honor mode. So any piece of food you find, you want to pick that up all throughout the game, right? There's plenty of it in Act 1, and I've just been accumulating as much of it as possible so that I can use it later, because it is often harder to find supply packs the further you get into the game. You should always have a cleric or someone with you as well that has guidance. I have 3 characters that have guidance that are currently with me just because I overspected a guidance, but you really should have guidance because it is so valuable for all of those ability checks, which seem to be significantly harder in the honor mode as well. Like, I've failed so many checks and it's quite depressing, but having guidance can really help with that. And part of that preparation topic as well is planning your route, knowing where you're going and what dialogue options you're going to choose and the outcome of those dialogue options, right? You don't want to get caught out like I did on my main run, where you accidentally pick an option that wipes your entire party and the run is over. So it's really important that you know what the outcome of these dialogue situations are and have a route plan. A good example or like idea would be to have done a run on, say, one of the lower difficulties and know exactly what you're going to do and where you're going to go and what bosses or dialogue or people or quests that you're actually going to skip, right? The achievement isn't for completing everything in the game, right? 100% in the game. You're not going to do that in the honor mode. The achievement is for actually completing honor mode, right? So it's just worth thinking about that and what you're going to take with you and where you're going to go, and not try and do everything and what you're actually going to do and not do, because especially some of those bosses, those optional bosses, are really, really hard, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in the combat section. Withers works wonders in every single playthrough, and it's so relevant for this as well. So we already talked about why hirelings are important, but it's also just good to have hirelings with you, like in case, say, you're doing sort of an evil sort of honor mode playthrough like I was and companions leave you. It's good to have those hirelings available to you. You can also respec yourself there, which you should be doing, just so you can get a build that's actually valuable for the level you're at. A good example of this, right, is that, say, at level 5 you get an extra attack if you're fully fighter, but then as you level up you may want to multi-class into something else that's a bit more of a valuable build to develop your character in that way. But in the early game there's no point really multi-classing in that way. The main thing to do as well is, if you are taking companions, even hirelings, is to respec them. They have awful stats, especially Shadowheart. Most of them have just really odd ability scores, and like they're on like uneven numbers, and it just like doesn't make a whole lot of logical sense if you're trying to min-max, especially on an honor mode playthrough where it is important to get as much juice out of your characters as possible. So you make sure you want to respec any companions you're taking with you, min-max their ability scores, make sure that they have good builds as well. Like, I have a ton of build videos on the channel which you can go and check out, even my full video about multi-class builds as well, so I'll link that here if you want to go watch that. But picking a really quality build is important for honor mode, and I might actually do some sort of honor mode build classes video as well. Let me know if if you're interested in that in the comments if you want something specific for honor mode and what works in honor mode and what doesn't. But the other thing as well with Withers is that you can actually steal any money that you have spent on him. It's also worth doing this because he does not care whatsoever. So anytime you spend 100 gold on him to get hireling or respec or anything, you can just steal it back. But do this often, because the more gold he has, the higher the difficulty is to actually get that roll, right? If he's got like, 60 gold, that roll of the dice is going to have to be higher than it is if he's only got 100. So do this often so that he hasn't got like thousands of gold, and it's like basically impossible unless you get a critical roll to actually steal the gold back off him. And that gold comes in real value in honor mode as well, because you're going to need gear, and the best way to get gear other than the gear you find in the world is from vendors. Now the prices seem to be higher in honor mode just because of the way the economy is balanced. So as always, selling things is as valuable as always, but you should be doing this with high approval. Now the simplest and quickest way to get the high approval rating so that you can sell items for more and buy items for less is to respec yourself at Withers back to level 1 and then give them about 350, 400 gold worth of items or even just straight gold, right? And they will instantly max out your approval rating with them, and then you've actually can buy anything for much cheaper, sell things for more, and it becomes much more valuable in that way. You probably want to do this with a vendor that's going to appear in all of the acts, right? Like Damon's a good example of this because he will appear in, I think, all of the, yeah, he does. He appears in all of the acts. That way you've got a specific vendor that you can always sell your items to get the maximum amount of gold, and then you can spend that at other vendors if you want to buy certain items that they do have to like complete your builds, which is absolutely worth doing. Vendors, inventories, and gold refresh on a long rest. So once you've long rest, you can go back to them and spend more money there or buy more stuff if you do want to do that. But it's just worth remembering to go back to those specific vendors. So the big ticket item with honor mode is really combat. Now, one of the main things to think about with combat here is that dealing damage is obviously the most important thing, right? Because if things are dead, they can't hit you back. But healing isn't as efficient in honor mode. In a lot of the easier difficulties, you can get away with healing a lot, and you can't really in honor mode because damage significantly outpaces the amount of healing you can output. But also, you want to stop damage from coming your way in other ways. That could be by using spells to put enemies to sleep, hold person, command, those sort of spells to prevent damage from coming towards you, or having them attack things that don't matter, right? Like say if you've summoned a spiritual weapon, those sort of things. Positioning is also just as important and a massive factor here, right? Obviously higher ground benefits versus low ground, but also keeping your squishy targets away from enemies, and generally speaking, not having too many squishy targets, right? Like the AI will still more or less target the character that is within range of them that has the lowest AC, unless there are other conditions that are affecting them. So paying attention to that and making sure that your character, in my case, my bard, which was my main character, so considering their positioning as well as thinking about choke points, right? Say if you piss off the people in a like indoor location, right, you can close the door to lock off that line of sight and actually have the enemies have to walk through that door. Then you can quickly engage them, close the door again, and sort of rinse, repeat. Use the environment to your scenarios and know the outcomes of conversations, encounters, arenas, who you're fighting, that sort of stuff. It's so important. The one thing that you won't know is the legendary actions that like the boss characters have, right? So all of the main bosses have these new legendary actions that are like specific to them, and anytime you engage one of these, you'll make sure you want to right click on them, examine, read what that legendary action is so you know how to counter it if it is counterable, which some of them are. But just knowing and expecting that action to occur is really important so you don't get caught out. And like generally avoid combat as much as possible, right? Charisma is king, especially in honor mode, right? You can persuade enemies not to fight, you can persuade bosses to just like simply skip fights as well and get the XP, which is the main thing you want out of any scenario in the honor mode, is to get XP as fast as possible so you can level up, become more powerful, and all that good stuff. And avoiding fights you aren't guaranteed to win is definitely worth doing. And like if you can't do that, just like cheese the fights, right? Like if you are in a situation where you're like, I don't know if this is going to work, you can leave a party member at your camp. Then if your entire party wipes, you can just talk to Withers and get them to summon them back at the camp, and then you're good to go. I've done this a couple of times in scenarios that I wasn't expecting to occur. And you can even like flee from combat encounters as well, right? Don't be afraid to do that. But the one thing to point out is that that method of having someone at camp can bug out on major boss fights that require all of your party to be there. there, but any other like random trash or any of that stuff, it's completely fine to use that strategy. But lastly, I would say that karmic dice is an interesting thing that you should be aware of. If you don't know what karmic dice is, it's an option in your settings that you can turn on and off. And when it's on, it will artificially scale dice rolls. Say if you fail a bunch of dice rolls in a row, it'll make sure that you pass one or a couple. And it also works for the enemies as well. Now, in most of my videos, I say to turn this off, right? Because if you have a really high armor class and enemies are constantly missing you and karmic dice is on, they have a higher chance of actually hitting you. Whereas if you turn this off, then there's no like artificial scaling to that RNG. It's just straight RNG, which is a good thing for the most part, but it can be a bad thing if you are failing rolls and attack rolls and even just like skill checks and stuff all the time, right? So, you know, whether you have this on or off, that's entirely up to you. It's just something to think about that, you know, maybe you want to have it on or maybe you want to have it off, but it's important more for your honor mode playthrough than in any other playthrough, because it's so important to pass those skill checks and those attack roll checks and the damage roll checks and all of those checks so you can actually pass this really hard mode. So I'll also say at the end here that essentially all of the advice I've given in like all of my beginners guides, tips and tricks, etc. is more or less all relevant in honor mode as well. I'll link my ultimate beginners guide, which includes basically all of that advice here if you want more information and like just touch up on the basics or anything that you may have missed or, you know, might not know about. I'll link all of that here for you guys. But, you know, let me know any thoughts you have in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is NorZZa and I hope you have a great day.